From the beginning of the Israel-Hamas war, Biden has supported Israel's right to defend itself.
We stand with Israel.
But he's also criticized many of the decisions Israel has made to do just that.
President Biden criticizing Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
Which made me wonder, is Biden carefully walking a political tightrope or sending mixed messages that are actually prolonging the Israel-Hamas war? Let's look at 5 examples. Number 1, the Rafah operation. The IDF started its ground operations in the north of Gaza, slowly working its way down in the months since. And now there's only one major city left for the IDF to clean Hamas out of: Rafah. The Israeli Prime Minister has said that entering Rafah is necessary to win the war.
We must destroy the remaining Hamas battalions in Rafah.
So there's an estimated 4,000 Hamas fighters in Rafah, and it's believed that many of the 134 Israeli hostages still held by Hamas could be there, as well as senior Hamas leaders. But alongside Hamas are over 1 million civilians who earlier in the war fled to Rafah from other parts of Gaza. World leaders have warned that a ground offensive in the city would spark a humanitarian catastrophe.
You cannot have 30,000 more Palestinians dead.
So some news outlets have speculated Biden could put conditions on military aid to Israel if an invasion of Rafah moves forward, though the White House denies it's considering such a move. The Israeli Prime Minister, meanwhile, has rejected all calls not to enter Rafah, saying that an invasion of the city is absolutely necessary to dismantle Hamas. But while the IDF presented plans for the Rafah operation weeks ago,
we need to see a plan that will get civilians out of harm's way if there's to be a military operation in Rafah. We have not yet seen such a plan.
So if Rafah is Hamas's last stand, is U.S. pressure on Israel not to invade Rafah extending Hamas's lifespan and essentially prolonging the war? It seems unlikely, at least for now. Time and again, Israel has encouraged civilians to evacuate from cities in Gaza before they invade, and there's no reason to believe Rafah will be any different. By all indications, Israel will work with the international community to set up safe zones outside of Rafah for civilians to move to. And Israel probably knows better than anyone that setting up such safe zones will take time. So it's unlikely U.S. pressure is directly holding Israel back from an operation in Rafah, as much as Israel is sort of holding itself back as it finalizes what is surely a logistical nightmare. But it could be there's a different problem. My question is, does U.S. opposition to a Rafah operation give civilians a sense of false hope that will lead them to avoid leaving the city? I mean, if Israel needs civilians to leave Rafah before invading, does the sense of hope that the U.S. will keep Israel from invading inadvertently encourage Gazans to stay in Rafah? And if so, does that mean Israel will need to further delay as it tries to get civilians out? Okay, it's possible, but once the safe zones are set up and humanitarian aid is flowing into them, bombs falling on the city will likely outweigh any hope that Israel isn't coming into Rafah. So while the pressure from the US might be contributing to the hesitancy to enter Rafah, the IDF already would need to prepare in any case, meaning this part of the war was going to take a while, no matter what. Number 2, military aid. While U.S. officials have grown more critical of Israel, military aid from the U.S. is still flowing pretty freely, at least for now. See, a bill to provide further military aid to Israel, which also includes aid for Ukraine and Taiwan, has been stuck in Congress for weeks, with Democrats and Republicans fighting over all sorts of related and unrelated issues, ranging from how big the aid package should be to whether it should include funding to secure the U.S.-Mexico border. But that's not all. Military aid to Israel is also at risk since, as I said earlier, a Rafah operation may result in the U.S. putting conditions on that aid. The U.S. may even ban Israel from using certain weapons if it invades, and disruptions to military aid could seriously impact Israel's plans. In Ukraine, for example, the holdup on the bill has led to ammunition shortages that have had a major impact on Ukrainian operations.
The shortages that Ukrainians have to deal with, 4 rounds, that's all they're going to get right now. And by the way, they're not even explosive rounds, they're smoke rounds.
In Israel's case, it could mean the IDF having less smart bombs, which are more precise, forcing the IDF to use less precise bombs that could cause more collateral damage and civilian casualties. Probably not the outcome the US wants. Okay, so are the stuck aid bill and the threats to condition military aid prolonging the war? It certainly could. Making plans for an assault on Rafah is complicated enough, but making those plans will take even longer if the IDF also needs to plan for not having certain weapons. On top of that, the threat to condition aid on the details of the plan means the IDF will need to spend more time preparing, presenting, and negotiating over the plan until the US is okay moving forward. All of that means that civilian lives probably will be saved, but it's going to be a while longer until this war is over. Number 3, the UN Security Council. Since the beginning of the war, the US has been vetoing resolutions at the UN Security Council that demanded an immediate ceasefire. So, on the one hand, we can say right away that this US support has given Israel leeway to carry on with the war, thus prolonging the war. But it gets more complicated. Late last month, while the UN Security Council was getting ready to vote on yet another resolution demanding an immediate ceasefire, the US announced it was presenting its own alternate draft resolution. The new resolution calls for a temporary ceasefire in Gaza as soon as practicable, which would include the release of all hostages. This alternate resolution would also condemn Hamas, something the other proposed resolutions have never done. But that's not all. The resolution would also urge Israel not to launch an offensive in Rafah. Noticing a theme? Okay, so we've been over why delaying the offensive in Rafah means prolonging the entire war. But it's important to note just how dramatic this draft resolution is. By proposing this resolution, the US is taking what was once criticism behind closed doors and setting a red line on the international stage for everyone to see.
The significant shift in US policy.
That said, the US is still protecting Israel against the harshest anti-Israel resolutions. But this is a sign that they are really serious about avoiding an invasion of Rafah, at least under the current conditions. This step and others like it mean that getting to an operation in Rafah and through it to the end of the war is going to be a long, bumpy road for Israel. Number 4, humanitarian aid. After over 100 people were killed in a stampede around an aid convoy, the U.S. immediately upped the pressure on Israel to increase the flow of aid into Gaza.
Israel must allow more aid into Gaza to ensure humanitarian workers aren't caught in the crossfire.
And that pressure has only increased in the weeks since, with the U.S. announcing recently that it was sending a military team to set up a port on the Gaza coast
That can receive large shipments carrying food, water, medicine, and temporary shelters.
But that port isn't going to be operational for a while, and the U.S. wants Israel to act now by opening up more land crossings. But even land crossings aren't looking great, with a recent pilot of a new entry point ending with 6 trucks being looted soon after they entered Gaza. Okay, so what kind of effect is all this hubbub about aid going to have on the length of the war? Because at first glance, there might not be an obvious connection between humanitarian aid and the length of the war. But for many Israelis, there's a direct line between the issues. With accusations that Hamas is stealing humanitarian aid, the argument is that increased aid means more resources for Hamas fighters, which means a longer war. The argument continues that more aid means less pressure on Gazans to rise up against Hamas. And it means less pressure on Hamas to release the hostages, a move which, by many accounts, would likely end international support for Israel continuing the war. But putting all of that aside, figuring out short-term and long-term solutions to the growing humanitarian crisis in Gaza is going to take time. And until that happens, it's going to be really hard for Israel to justify an operation in Rafah. Number 5, the two-state solution. So Biden has made it clear. He wants to see a path to a two-state solution, a Jewish state side by side with a Palestinian state, as soon as the war is over, and is even potentially willing to unilaterally recognize a Palestinian state, meaning without Israel on board.
We support the establishment of an independent Palestinian state. There are any number of ways that you could go about accomplishing that.
But while the U.S. is set on the creation of a Palestinian state, Israeli officials have expressed strong opposition to the idea, at least in the short term.
הסדר כזה יושג אך ורק במשא ומתן ישיר בין הצדדים, ללא תנאים מוקדמים.
Israel's parliament, the Knesset, even held a vote to stress that Israel would not accept the unilateral creation of a Palestinian state. All that said, the Israeli Prime Minister in general has been hesitant to discuss what will happen in Gaza the day after the war, although he did publish a one-page document outlining some things he'd like to see. So the goals include having Israel be solely responsible for security in the region and having civil matters in Gaza taken care of by, quote, local officials, whatever that means. In fact, the only reference the document makes to the two-state solution is a line rejecting any unilateral recognition of a Palestinian state. But whether or not that means Israel will never accept a Palestinian state isn't so clear. So while it may be a while until the war is over, the US and many others feel there needs to be a clear idea of where the region is headed. Part of that vision needs to include some kind of hopeful future for the Palestinian people. Otherwise, as the argument goes, the violence will continue. In the eyes of the US, a path to independence would give Palestinians a reason to pursue peace. On the other hand, many Israelis feel that a fully independent Palestinian state would pose a serious security threat to Israel, at least the way things are right now. Look, surveys show that Palestinians still strongly support terrorism, and in particular, Hamas. And on top of that, Israelis are well aware that steps towards a long-term peace deal have, historically, led to an increase in terrorism, as terrorist groups like Hamas try to scuttle any efforts that could result in recognition of and normalization with the Jewish state. In fact, some analysts believe that Hamas chose the timing of the October 7th massacre specifically because Saudi Arabia was rumored to be close to normalizing relations with Israel. So, while the question of whether or not there will be a two-state solution is unlikely to affect the length of the current war, all sides agree that it will have a major effect on how the Israeli-Palestinian conflict moves forward. One side hopes such a solution will prevent future conflicts. The other side fears it will only guarantee continued violence.